Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt with the Catholic Identity Conference. I wanted to give a quick commercial before we start. The Catholic Identity Conference starts later on this afternoon, and all of the video conferences will be available on video on demand. So if you haven't signed up yet, please consider going to our website right now. Plenty of time to sign up and have all these conferences, including the one we're really looking forward to tomorrow night, which is our keynote address that's going to be delivered by His Excellency Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who I have the great honor now to present to you in interview format here before the Catholic Identity Conference starts. Your Excellency, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. I wanted to start with something you said to me the last time I saw you in Rome. You gave me a great encouragement by saying that we shouldn't fear because the victory has already been won by Jesus Christ. And I wonder if you could just share with our viewers how you mean that.
We know the phrase in the Holy Scripture of St. John in his epistle. He says, "This is the victory over the world, our faith." And this is the Catholic apostolic faith, which we know, which we got from our fathers, ancestors, the saints, during 2000 years, the same faith. We got this, we received this, we know this faith in the catechism, in the traditional catechism, and so we are sure of our faith. We are sure that this faith conquered the entire world. And so, because it is not a human opinion, a human faith, a human theory, which we can change, but it is a divine faith. And this gives us the strength, the conviction, and to be sure of our faith.
So, sort of leading from that, there's so much now that good people are seeing that fills them with fear. And I think even though they have the supernatural faith in Jesus Christ, ultimate victory, in the ultimate triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, there's this concern that in the meantime, when so many people have left the church and have lost the faith because of the scandal that they see, there's a concern that they too might succumb and might begin to question the church fundamentally. What do we do to encourage people not to be seduced or not to be so discouraged that you end up leaving the church and doing exactly what the devil wants, is to abandon the church?
Yes, this would be the biggest mistake, to leave the church, because the church is our mother. How can you leave your mother? The church gave us the supernatural life. Not the Pope gave us supernatural life, not the bishop, but the Holy Mother Church, we say. And we have to say to the people, the church is greater than the Pope or the bishop or the cardinals. They are members of the church also. And so the church is greater. And therefore, we have to love our Mother Church even more in this time of her passion. We have to say to people, our Mother Church is now enduring Holy Friday, because the church is the mystical body of Christ. And by this divine permission, God permitted that the church in the past 50, 60 years entered a time really the way of the cross, the stations of the cross. And I think now we arrived in this, our current time, we arrive to the Calvaria, Golgotha. Our Mother Church is humiliated, as Jesus Christ was, is in chains, as Jesus was tied. And today, those who humiliate our Mother, the Church, and are not so much the enemies of the Church, but incredibly the clergy mostly, and even high clergy in the church. This is the mystery, in some way, of Judas, which also God permitted, our Lord. And so we have to be with our Mother Church and say, we will be with you in this time of Calvary, and be faithful to our Mother Church in keeping the immutable faith which we know. Why they have to leave the church? It is has no sense to leave the church, because they have the faith, these people. Why have they left the church? They know the catechism. They know the saints. They can receive Holy Communion, even when they have to drive a distance to have a worthy Holy Mass. But so many Christians did this and do this in time of persecutions. And so they have the faith, the catechism, they have the sacraments. What they need more? It is the mistake of them is to identify a concrete holder of an office, ecclesiastical office, even if it is the Pope or a bishop. They identify him totally with the church. This is the error. We have to abandon this very narrow vision of the church. Church is larger, greater. And so these faithful, we have to encourage them. You will help our Mother Church in staying. Of course, you have the right to resist heresy, even to your bishop, even to the Pope, if he does this, respectfully, not as people who have no faith, or because we are not a party where we fight with the secular and worldly means. We are members of the mystical body of Christ, and the church is ultimately a supernatural reality and not an organization only. And therefore we have to use the other means, not as they who fight in parties or in organizations, their wars. No, we have to have other means. And this is the fidelity to the church, to the teaching of the church, and then the prayers. We have to pray, and even we have to say these people, please do reparation for the infidelity and apostasy of, unfortunately, not so few shepherds of the church in our day.
Archbishop Vigano, in an interview with Robert Moynihan of Inside the Vatican, said something interesting. He said he believes what's happening in the church at the highest levels does find its roots in 1789 in Freemasonry. And on the one hand, that's an encouraging thing to think that there's been a war against the church from her enemies for hundreds of years and they still haven't won. But can you say something about the roots of all of this? How did the church get to this point? Do you think Freemasonry did have a part to play in the auto-destruction of the human element of the church?
It is obvious and logic, because if we know what Freemasonry is, and we know what Freemasonry is, this is the anti-church. Exactly the opposite of what Christ founded his holy church. This is the exact opposite. So the church of the enemy of God, and specifically of Christ. They present themselves, we are not against religion. Of course, they are not against religion. But they are against the uniqueness and exclusivity of Jesus Christ and his holy church, against divine revelation. And therefore, of course, every clever and cunning enemy will try to eliminate, to destroy his enemy. And the church is, the Freemasonry declared since the beginnings of their work and existence, always the Catholic Church as the greatest and as the enemy par excellence. We have several affirmations from high-ranking Freemasons all over the history of the Church. This, you cannot deny this. This is not a theory of conspiracy. It would be ridiculous. It is their facts and proofs, and so, and therefore, but the most efficient means in strategy to damage, to harm your enemy is to penetrate inside this. Like a virus in our body who is destroying the immunity of our body and the health. And so they did this. First they started to fight directly against the church during the French Revolution. It was a demonstration. And then during different moments in the church and in European history and in Latin America, substantially there were Freemasonic governments. And then they used a tool in a very wide scale to fight against Christ. It was the Communist October Revolution. It is proven with documents that they gave logistic, financial, and other support to Freemasons in Europe to do the October Revolution in Russia. And the first and Lenin himself was member of several Freemasonic lodges in Europe, and his close collaborators, all by names, were the mostly of them were Jewish Freemasons, Russian Jewish Freemasons. And so this is proven. And so they used this tool to fight against Christ and the Church, and we witnessed the 70 years of the war of the communist dictatorships in Russia and in the Warsaw Bloc countries against the Church. And now they made the next more clever and cunning path. Maybe they did this also already in a parallel form, to penetrate inside the church. And they did this since the 19th century. We have some signs and some indications. The famous document of the Alta Vendita, it is known, it is a document. And then, of course, they penetrated in the seminaries, in the faculties, with their liberal ideas. Yeah. And this is the relativism. There is no stable and immutable truth. This is the core of Freemasonic ideology, that we, human being, is the author of truth and can change this to his desires. Mm-hmm. And so it is the core of the modernism, of the thinking, the relativism, and the completely naturalism, anthropocentrism. And Freemasonry is, by definition, naturalism. It's completely anti-supernatural, anti-revelation. And so we see the same marks. It's not, I will not say that the modernists were Freemasons, but the shape of thinking were very similar. They were contaminated by this manner of thinking. And since then, the modernist movement in the church penetrated ever more and reached their, how do you say, I would say they reached their peak at the Second Vatican Council, because they used this church assembly as a tool to promote ever more their relativistic, anthropocentristic, naturalistic theories in the theology, in the liturgy, in the life of the church, in the pastoral life. And so we have already this, and after the council, they managed, the modernists, and partly also, we cannot exclude these partly also true members of Freemasonry, who got high-ranking positions in the church.
Like a Bugnini, perhaps.
Yes, and others who were hidden, maybe. This was a parallel. Other simply modernists who were not linked with Freemasonry, but they were thinking in a similar way, this naturalistic, relativistic mode. And so, or already convinced Freemasons in the ranks of the episcopacy and the cardinals, and other, maybe even nuncios. And they, of course, helped the modernist clergy, who were not Freemasonic, but their similar thinking, they promoted them to high positions of the church. And so it is evident that this is a strategy, and now we have, with this pontificate, we are witnessing how, without blunting, without shame, real, evident heretics, deniers of the Catholic truth, are not only promoted to high-ranking church offices, but they are in some way even given a reward and for their betrayal of Christ, of their promoting of the spirit of this world in the church.
You mentioned this word uniqueness, that Freemasonry has a problem with the uniqueness or the supremacy of the Catholic Church. And you've been such a champion of communion on the tongue, of retaining reverence for our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. Do you think that communion in the hand, whether everyone who was responsible for that was aware of this or not, but do you think that came into this idea of reducing the uniqueness of the Church? Because if enough of the Catholic faithful could begin to lose faith in the real presence, then we become very much like Protestants. Was communion in the hand, in other words, one of the ways of sort of equalizing all the religions? The Catholic Church is no longer believes, 75% of American Catholics, for example, don't believe in Christ's real presence. And does that play a part in reducing the uniqueness of the Church?
It's a part, but I think that, yes, this relativistic, modernistic spirit which was already reigning in faculties, in theological faculties, and in the episcopacy, is substantially also Protestant, because these to make the Church like others, not the uniqueness, as we speak, of divine revelation. And so we have first to touch the heart of the Church, and this is the Holy Eucharist, the heart. And when we relativize the heart of the Church, then we can relativize also other realities, other truths, and so they started a general attack on the mystery of the Eucharist. First with the radical revolutionary changing of the Mass, of the liturgy of the Mass, to make the Mass more acceptable to the Protestants. And even they did so. The Protestants, after the publication of the Novus Ordo, several Protestants affirmed that this is very close to our thinking, and even some Protestants pastors said we can take the Novus Ordo and celebrate it, but only with the second Eucharistic prayer, this short one, which is the minimum of Catholic doctrine there expressed. And so we have already these affirmations of Protestants. This was the first attack to relativize the Eucharist, the sacrificial character of the Holy Mass, which is this uniqueness of the Catholic doctrine, and of course also of the Orthodox Church. Here we are united in this truth about the sacrificial character, the fundamental and essential sacrificial character of the Holy Mass. And so it was a shift to this banquet and meal theory of Martin Luther in the mode of celebrating, and even in the texts of celebrating the Novus Ordo. This was the first attack, and then parallelly it came in 69 the permission of Pope Paul VI for hand communion. And this is a direct attack on the truth. But because by time, when you take our Lord in such a simple, ordinary manner as you take a cake or an ordinary meal in your hand and put yourself in your mouth, so by time it also weakens the conviction of a person and his belief that this is something special, not ordinary, which I cannot behave in the same or a similar manner as I behave towards an ordinary meal. And so, and this now demonstrated that this weakened the belief in the real presence and the transubstantiation, the divinity, the presence of the divinity of Christ in this little host also. And then the sacredness, of course, and then the care with the fragments, with the which fall down evidently and then are trampled, and so this was also an attack to a mass desacralization of the Holy of Holies which we have in the Church, of the heart of the Church. And this was surely also an intent of the Freemasons, of the enemies of the Church, to hit the heart of the Church, and to make this attack on the Holy of Holies in the Church through this practice of communion in hand. Of course, a lot of people were instructed to do this, and they are innocent. They have no guilt, because they did not know another way to receive Holy Communion, unfortunately. But the responsibility, the guilt, have the clergy, and ultimately Pope Paul VI, who permitted this, even when he said, "I am against." But how can you say when there comes someone who will burn your house, and you say, "Oh, I am against that you burn my house," but then he enters and he starts to burn your house and you do nothing, and only say, "I have said to you, I was against that you burn my house," and you are not acting against. So it was this behavior of Paul VI. He said, "Oh, I am against. Please keep the communion on the tongue." But in the same text, in a short note, you can also, in some occasions, give communion on the hand. And this was, he opened in a dam where the water is collected. When you make a little hole in this
Finger in the dike.
Yeah. And then by time it will overflow. And so we had this. You could observe this before already, and this is for me ununderstandable how Paul VI could permit this tragedy, I say tragedy of the communion in hand, with all its consequences.
So we see from that it would be a mistake for anyone to attach full blame for what's happening in the church right now, to attach the blame on Pope Francis. This has been a long time coming. Can you say something? You just wrote the statement against what happened in Rome. We were both in Rome recently watching the unfolding of the Amazon Synod, and you wrote an excellent statement against this Pachamama, and you cited Psalm 79, and that comes pretty close, since Pope Francis was defending that. That comes fairly close to you resisting Pope Francis himself then in the statement that you made, that you wrote. Do you think had you ever envisioned yourself having to make a statement like that, where you would be essentially standing against the Holy Father, which no Catholic ever wants to go through?
I never in my life imagined this, that I should one day publicly, or privately and publicly, ask the Holy Father to condemn such acts which he supports, as it was with the Abu Dhabi statement on the equality or diversity of all religions, which I did, and now with these horrible acts of idolatry in the Vatican. And then I could never imagine that I have to do a defense of the first commandment in the church, of the most basic, that idolatry is against divine revelation, that you cannot perform idolatry acts. In the Catholic Church, this is for me already the peak, the culmination of all the evils which were already accumulating in the past in the past decades. But it is a demonstration to which extent the evil, the apostasy, the betrayal of Christ penetrated in the church with this manifestation. And even Pope Francis, unfortunately, defends the veneration of these Pachamama idols, in saying there were no idolatrous intention using them. But how we can discover the intentions? We cannot see the heart. We see the heart of the people. We can only observe the acts, the exterior acts, and the exterior acts were, in all evidence, acts of religious cult, bowing, revering, and even prayers towards a wooden statue which is not representing neither a saint, but it was demonstrated it is, and even the Pope said this was Pachamama, and Pachamama in the entire culture of the indigenous American people, South American, is a concept of a kind of goddess. And so this is against evidence to deny that it was not idolatry. And so we have to say it was idolatry. And we have to ask the Pope, and I ask, to condemn this. And not only to condemn, to make acts of reparation. It has to be done, the Pope the First in the Basilica of St. Peter, to make a service, prayer service of reparation to the Divine Majesty and in the Church of Transpontina also. But you know this, the evil has a logic in itself. And the evil wants to reach always its culmination. So when you start to deny one truth, or to obscure one truth, or to present this in a relativistic, ambiguous manner, so it is in self already have the, it's like a virus in the body. It's already there, and a virus wants to develop itself. And when you not resist this, it will by time conquer the entire body, as the cells of the cancer. They're spreading. But it's sufficient one cell of the cancer to have in the body, and not controlled. And then it will occupy and conquer. And so we have now the evil of the relativism, doctrinal relativism, doctrinal ambiguity, which we have already partly in some expressions of the text of the Second Vatican Council, like that we adore together with the Muslims the one God, or that man is the center of and the culmination of all what exists here on earth, or that you have a natural right by your nature itself to choose, to have the freedom of religion. It could be explained that you cannot be forced to another religion. This is another meaning, but it means also that you have the liberty to choose a religion. Even so, the text of the Vatican Council says that every person has the obligation to seek the truth, and this is the Catholic Church. But in another, further, says that you have the freedom of religion rooted in your nature.
And this is all from the Second Vatican Council.
Yes, this is in the text of Dignitatis Humanae. And so it is ambiguous. It is not clear. And the consequences after the council were that in all Catholic, almost all Catholic seminaries and theological faculties, and in the episcopate, and even the Holy See, promoted the doctrine that you have really a right, every person, to choose his religion. No, you have no right to choose idolatry. You have no right to offend God through idolatry or through blasphemy. And this is already here rooted. I mean, if you have a right by God given to you by nature, also to be able to choose acts of idolatry, like the Pachamama. So, when it is rooted in your dignity of man, even to choose a Pachamama religion, this is the last consequence of this expression of the council text. And I repeat, it was this expression is ambiguous. It had to be in another way formulated to avoid these applications in the life of the Church, which we had also in the Assisi meeting of Pope John Paul II in 1986, and the other repeated, where even idolatrous religions were invited to pray in their manner, so in the idolatrous manner, for peace. We see already these moments present, but now these which we witnessed in the Vatican, the formal performance of idolatrous acts in the Catholic Church, in the heart of the Catholic Church, in St. Peter, it is the triumph of the evil, in this manner. But we have to pray and to make reparation for this and to implore the divine intervention of God. And God will intervene because it is His church, it's not our church. Our church is not, the church is not in our hands in the first time. Now in this time many Catholics have the temptation. Now we will take this in our hands and we will resolve. Enough is enough, we will resolve. This is human behavior. You can so behave when you have a party or an organization, but not the church. The head of the church is Christ. And so they say we will declare the Pope not more Pope for several reasons, or the See of Peter vacant, or Pope Benedict the true Pope, and all these solutions are simply human solutions, which will not give a greater clarity, but will confuse. It is human. We have to stay, and it's also running away from the Golgotha of the church.
Right.
And we have to say, no, stay with us on the Golgotha, and the church will resurrect if we have faith. Golgotha is not the last station, it's the 12th.
That's right.
And then comes the resurrection. And oftentimes, when the enemies think they are powerful, they are proud of what they did in the church, destroying the Catholic faith, destroying the Catholic liturgy, adapting the church completely to the world. And they have power. And they are thinking, now we are finally we reached our goal to completely adapting the Catholic Church to the world, even to paganism. And then will God say, you're foolish, and will show them that He is the Lord, and will, as Our Lady, our Blessed Mother Mary says in the Magnificat, deposuit potentes de throne. He got deposed those powerful from their thrones, and exalts the humble one, the little one in the church. And this will come. We have to believe in this and have this supernatural spirit, and we have to make a net and a kind of army, spiritual army of prayers, a chain of acts of reparation. This is our army, this is our weapons. Of course, also a chain of public acts of profession of faith, of defending our faith, of apologetics, and to train also the spirit of the militant church, to train us also in the spirit of, even I would say, of martyrdom. We have to be prepared that we will be persecuted, and the entire church. But this will bring the true flourishing of the church. We have not to be fearful only of this short passing life which we are here on earth. St. Paul writes, if we would believe Christ only in this life, we would be the most unhappy people on earth. I paraphrasing St. Paul. He writes about the resurrection of Christ. If Jesus Christ is not risen, and so we will be believing only on the earthly Christ, who is not resurrected, and then St. Paul writes, we will be the most unhappy, pitiable people here on earth. And the same, if we only want to be here on earth and not the trust and confidence that our homeland is heaven, and God will reward all what we have done with a sincere heart and pure intention for His kingdom here on earth, even if we had to suffer, more to suffer than to triumph. It will bring to us heavenly glory, heavenly happiness in God. And we had done a very efficacious contribution to the restoring and renewal of the church. And so I would say we have to have this confidence, even this inner joy in midst of the darkness. I know to whom I believed. I know to whom I belong. I know that I belong to the army of the winners, of the conquerors, because Christ is our chief. He is Christ the King, and we are all His soldiers, spiritual soldiers. And so, and then we have Our Lady. She is she has a title. She conquered all the heresies. She destroyed all heresies. And so we are happy to be in the army of Jesus Christ, the King, and we are happy to be children of Our Lady, of our Heavenly Mother, who destroys all heresy. Our Heavenly Mother, who gave us her Immaculate Heart in these difficult times in Fatima, in her messages in Fatima, and she said, this is your refuge. My Immaculate Heart is your refuge. And so I would say we will continue to love our Mother Church, not to abandon our Mother Church, to implore the divine intervention in due time, in the time which God knows, to pray for the Pope, for our Holy Father, to have the supernatural vision of his ministry, the Patrine Office, independent, who occupies now the Patrine Office. We will be faithful to the Cathedral of St. Peter, and even be ready to give our life for this truth of the primacy of Peter and his successors, because this is divine constitution of the Church. And to pray for the Pope, for the actual Pope, for the current Pope, that God may fill him with His Spirit and touch his heart. And I hope, and so we will, in this way, we are the best friends of Pope Francis, his best friends. He has only one soul. He has only one soul. And every one of us has to be save his own soul. And we have to be also charitable, and we have to have love for our neighbor, and also for Pope Francis, to implore that he may also have, when he will appear before the judgment of God, and he will do this, that our prayers for him now will bring him at least consolation in the moment when he will be judged by the divine judge. And then he will maybe remember us that there were so many little souls in the church, maybe whom I condemned as the rigid ones, who were praying for me, who were demonstrating their supernatural love for me, and continuing to venerate me as the Vicar of Christ. And so we shall do this, and hopefully that God may fill him with the true spirit of St. Peter, of all the holy popes and martyr popes, specifically, I would say, that he may recognize these dangers and errors and ambiguities in which he collaborated in the past years. And so we will say, Most Holy Father, we are your best friends, really, and we want only your best, that you save your soul, that you will have a merciful judgment before God, but especially that you will be true in your work, in your words, a successor of the holy popes, of the martyr popes, and really be in all your words defend unambiguously Christ, the truth, even to the extent to give your life for the truth, not for Mother Earth, have to give your life, not for climate change, not for Pachamama, not for the ideas and the agenda of the already partly apostatized clergy. You have not to give your life for introducing female ordinations to change the divine constitution of the Church thereby, to change the apostolic rule of priestly celibacy. You have not to do this. Give your life for Christ, defending His treasure which He gave to you, to your hands. And so, and all the little ones in the Church who love the Church will continue to pray for the Church, for the Pope, and for the triumph of Christ the King and the Immaculate Heart of our Heavenly Mother.
It's beautiful. You brought a tear to my eye just listening to the voice of the Church that comes through your words. You've also anticipated all my questions, but I would be really remiss if I allowed this interview to conclude without mentioning your book. And it just seems to be so providential, the timing of the book, the title of the book, Christus Vincit. And I know you don't have time. The book is literally a page turner. It makes me regret the fact that page turner is sort of a cliche. This one actually is. You can learn so much, and the way it is set up, it's so readable. But just tell me something just briefly about our viewers also, so that they can run out and order this book right away. The title, is it now, we're to the point now where we may not have all the answers to the scandal that we're seeing, but what we need to do at this point is cling to the kingship of Christ and cling to the old faith, stand at the foot of the cross and wait for God to save His Church. Is that kind of what went into the title of your book, this idea of the kingship of Christ?
Yes. The title Christus Vincit means Christ triumphs, Christ wins. And I chose this title in order to give hope and even consolation and strength to those Catholics who are in these difficult times, even in distress, in despair, who have no orientation, to give them a kind of consolation and trust even, that in the midst of the darkness we have lights, even small lights. They are signs of hope. And especially the immutable beauty of the Catholic Church. This was my intent to present in my book, the immutable, ever young, immutable beauty of the Catholic faith and of the Catholic liturgy and of the Catholic saints. And I concluded my book with a vision on the Eucharist, that from the Holy Eucharist, from the Holy Mass, there will come the victory. And now we are witnessing that the Latin Mass, the traditional Mass, I call this the Mass of all ages, or the constant form of the Roman Rite, not the extraordinary, but the constant, are ever more growing and attracting young people, even children. And this is really a sign that the beauty of the Church cannot be ultimately destroyed, even not by a pope. The Church is stronger than the unfaithful clergy. The Church is stronger. And this was my intention to transmit in my book this beauty of our Church, of our Mother Church, and give hope, and that Christ triumphs.
Praise Jesus. Yeah. Thank you so much for this time that you've shared with us today.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful to God that we have princes of the Church who are still leading us in devotion to the Church and to the Church's Holy Mother and to Christ the King. So thank you. God bless your work.
And also what you are doing for the Church.
Thank you so much. Bless you.
Yes, we do need more knights of the Catholic Church.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm Michael Matt with Bishop Athanasius Schneider here in Pittsburgh with the Catholic Identity Conference. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.